Let's start with a raw snare track and a completely empty instance of Retrig. The goal here is not just to replace the snare with samples, but to make the snare stronger while keeping the drummer's original dynamics, including the ghost notes. First, open the sample browser, choose a snare sample set, add the files to the bin, and press Load Bin. Retrig analyzes the samples and maps them into the velocity and round-robin matrix. By default, threshold is set to 50, and at this setting, the detector catches the main snare hits, but the quieter ghost notes are still not being triggered consistently. Threshold is the level boundary for detection. Signals below the threshold are ignored, while signals above it can trigger a sample. Depth works together with threshold. It controls how deeply the detector listens for weaker transient details. To catch the ghost notes, we lower the threshold until the quiet hits start to appear in the detection. Now the detector is sensitive enough to hear the subtle notes, but we also need to control bleed from the other drum microphones. This is where depth becomes important. We adjust depth until the ghost notes are still detected, but unnecessary triggers from bleed are minimized. In a real multi-mic drum recording, bleed can be difficult to avoid completely. Retrig also has a unique link function that helps several plugin instances use other drum events as context for bleed control, but we will cover link in a separate tutorial. Once the detection is stable, we can shape the dynamics. Retrig gives us three main tools for this: leveling, velocity curve, and clamp. Leveling smooths the dynamic range of the triggered samples. Higher leveling makes the snare more even and controlled, which can work well for a dense modern sound. Lower leveling keeps more of the natural difference between soft and hard hits. Velocity curve changes how the strength of the incoming hit is translated into sample layer selection. A more aggressive curve pushes softer hits into harder layers sooner, while a softer curve keeps the response more natural. Clamp limits the playable velocity range inside the matrix without deleting any samples. It is useful when you only want the plugin to use soft layers, hard layers, or a narrower dynamic zone. In this case, we want to preserve as much of the original performance as possible, so we do not need heavy leveling or a narrow clamp range. A small velocity curve adjustment is enough to make the snare feel stronger while keeping the ghost notes and the natural movement of the drummer's performance. Now let's compare the result. The original snare was weaker and less consistent. With Retrig, the main hits have more weight, the ghost notes are still present, and the performance keeps its natural dynamics.